Okay, you just got your new bike, and a lot of people, they immediately think about getting some new bling bling and whatever. But in order to customize and individualize your bike, there are actually tons of stuff on your bike that you can do and adjust, so it becomes your bike, right? So it's most comfortable for you to ride, and not necessary for anyone else to ride, right? So without buying some stuff, right? So one of the things we do first is looking at the bars, right? Basically all bikes, when they come out of the factory, the bars, those angles are set up for on-road use. That means the bars are slanted towards you, right? And most of the time this part here is parallel to the ground. Now, one thing that we look at when we look at bars are three angles. The first angle will be this angle here, and this is basically the height. Some bars are lower, some bars are higher. The second angle is this angle here. Some bars here, sometimes they're a little bit higher, and sometimes a little bit lower. And the third angle is this angle here, right? Now, to me, that last angle is most important, right? So now you have bars that are higher, so you can either buy bars that are higher and you don't have to buy bar risers, or you can buy bar risers and leave the bars that you have, right? So two ways you can walk. Now with this part here, to me, like I said, the last angle is most important, because when you ride on-road, it's very different than when you ride off-road. On-road, you have counter steering and all these ways how to ride. Now, you have to have this angle. So because if that angle is bigger, then obviously you can push the bike more efficiently. You don't have to push it such a long distance. So it's easier to ride in twisties, and when you go faster, it's just more efficient to ride. Now, when we go riding off-road, a lot of times we do stand up. Now, when we look from the top down, if that angle is too big, you're basically going to ride like this, and you feel like riding a Harley, right? So, but what you want is a little more straight out bar. That would be better, even though we don't use bars to ride or turn off-road, but that's a different question. Now, what we do is we could switch our bars with a different angle that suits our riding, or we can use the standard bars, open up the clamps here, and just rotate the bars just a little bit to the front. Now, when we rotate them a little bit to the front, we actually straighten out a little bit that angle, so they become a little bit straighter and not so angled, which is a little more comfortable when we stand up and ride off-road. They have these markers here, right? So you can look at these markers and see where you want to have them, or when you adjust them, where they've been, and so you don't use the same angle all the time and think you have a different angle and just waste some time. So these markers are actually pretty good. Some people, I do this sometimes too, just use a pen and use my own markers at a different spot. It's up to you, but most importantly is you need reference points. So what you can do is you loosen up these bolts here a little bit. They don't have to come out all the way. And what you can do is you just rotate them to the front or to the back as needed, right? Now, basically, what you think of is the longer the distance between your bars and your pegs are, the more comfortable it is. Right? That's why, for example, the GS is such a comfortable bike, because the distance is a bit longer. Right? Now, the shorter it gets, the more active it becomes. So it's really good in technical situations, right? But the comfort is not that great, right? That's why it's good. The GS is good in technical stuff, but because it's just a longer distance, it is not as nimble or easy to maneuver as, for example, like the Tenere or even the 790 or 890 ADV, because they're really short. But for beginner riders especially, we rotate the bars a bit to the front. We open up that distance a little bit, so it's more comfortable to ride. So this is one thing. One thing is we have to look at is don't over-rotate. Right? So if we go too far to the front, then basically the ends here will stick up, and this will be counterproductive, because you will be riding like this, and this is obviously very uncomfortable. This angle is more or less the standard angle of the bars when you get a Tenere. To me, this angle here is a little bit too big. So that's why for me, I just rotate them a little bit to the front, like this, right? And the bars a little straighter, right? Obviously, when I sit down, the distance has increased, so you have to make sure that this is okay riding on road, because we do ride on road, not only off road. So you have to check on that. If you're done here, I would suggest you just take you take your tool and you just kind of tighten it just a little bit, not too tight, right? And what you do then is, it's really important, after you've adjusted like that, you have to double check, because if you have your hand guards here, if you rotate and they hit your display, it's going to be a very costly repair. So both sides, you see if they hit or come close to your display. Now, if they hit, you have to do something about that. You maybe have to rotate back, or you have to adjust your hand guards, whatever, right? This is something you really have to do before you tighten all the screws, right? Also, really important is, if you test it and it's just 2-3 millimeters away from the display, to me, it's still too close. Why? When you crash, it will flex. So if it's already really close to your display, it will flex into your display. Even though like this, it will not touch it, right? So always give it just a little more space than needed, just to be sure, because those displays are really expensive. Okay, now we set our bars, and we like the angle. It's not too far, it's not too close. We like when we stand up and everything, so it's really good. Now the next part will be, if you haven't touched your front brakes and your clutch, you realize one thing, and that's that they move downwards. Now the basic principle is, usually what we do also in on-road riding, is you want to have one line, your forearm and your hands. If you have to do this or this, you'll cramp up and it's going to be uncomfortable really fast, right? So you want to have it ideally in one line, so you have to do this only. So this is most relaxing. Now what you realize now is you're going to have this movement here, right? Because it's too low. Now we're also going to stand, right? So when we stand up like this, then all of a sudden it might feel better, right? Because now our angle here is more aligned. Maybe not as much, maybe even more. But there's one thing. The thing is, a lot of people, they do it, you know what, I'm going to ride like this, so my front brake and my clutch, it also should be adjusted downwards, because then I have this straight line, right? Makes sense. Not really. Why? Because we don't brake like this. When we brake, we always move our bodies to the back, right? Now when we move our bodies to the back, obviously this angle changes from this to this. So when your front brake is too low, you're going to end up again like this, but your hands have to move down and pull, which is going to be really uncomfortable. What's going to be worse is when you ride downhill, because your front wheel is going to be even lower and you have to do even more like this. That's why I suggest not to move your front brake too far down. It could be a little further down than when you ride, but not too much, because when you brake, you will be moving your weight to the back, your body positioning more to the back, and that will lower that angle of your arms. So it's going to be still more comfortable. Now, you have the same thing on the left side with the clutch. Now, we don't always move our body to the back when we use the clutch, yes, but again, this is a personal choice. Some people, they like it symmetrical, so let's have left and right at the same angle. Some people have two different angles. For me personally, I don't care, I have both at the same angle. But this is really important. After you're done with the angle of your bars, you have to look at the angle of your front brake and your clutch, because this will determine if you're going to have a more relaxed ride, or if you have more arm pump or more cramps in your forearm than necessary. While we're at the levers, we also have to look at the distance of the levers to the bars, right? Some people have longer fingers, some people have shorter fingers. Most bikes have 4, 5, or 6 settings where you can adjust the distance, right? So it's really important. Sometimes we see guys with the longest distance, and they tell me like they have a hard time braking and they have no feel while braking. Of course, because you have to reach the whole time and it's not comfortable. Look at your brakes and first check out what distance is most suitable for your fingers here, and spend money afterwards. The same thing goes also for the clutch, Most clutches have different settings also for different length of fingers. Okay, everyone has their own preferences, but basically what you want to go for is to have these two fingers here, round around the first joint where you can put pressure on the lever like this. If you can barely reach it like this, obviously you have to go and reach around, and this is just not safe or efficient. Really important is to keep it here at the first joint. You pull in. If you're like this, and chances are that you're going to hit the knuckles of your other fingers here, and over a whole day, that's not a nice experience. When it comes down to the feet, it's going to be the same thing. Most bikes, they're going to be set up for road use. Road use means you sit down. That means also your feet most of the time will point more downwards. That's why the lever here is going to be more in a lower height. Now that means when you're riding off-road and you stand up, this part here is going to be low as it is. When you ride downhill and you move your weight to the back, it's going to be almost impossible to use the rear brake. Now with the Tenere having a very soft rear brake, it's going to be with MX boots or Enduro boots, it's going to be even bigger pain to actually flex your boot that far down, right? The 890, the 790 ADV-R, the rear brake, it's really sharp. That means like you just press it a little bit and you basically are locking up the rear wheel. Not so with the Tenere. But no matter what, we always suggest that you move up your rear brake pedal just a little bit more. There are bikes where you can adjust it, the GSA, the Pan America, you can just flip it around. With KTMs, you have to use some tools, but you can also flip it around, right? So it's gonna be higher. So do that first and see if that's okay. Don't immediately take out your tools and start working. First, check. So basically what we wanna do is here, having it on more or less on the same height as your pegs, all right? So in that case, you should be fine. It's going to be just a little bit too high when riding on-road, but it's really good when riding off-road. Now on the shifting side here is the same thing, right? So you don't want them to be too low, right? Because especially with off-road boots, they're thicker. So if they're too low, you're going to have a hard time, possibly even impossible, for you to wedge your foot between these two to actually shift, right? So you want to adjust them a little bit higher. When we look here again, to me actually they're like half a centimeter to a centimeter higher than the pegs, right? Another reason is because we've seen that a couple of times as well. If you have them too low, they're more prone to actually hit a rock or a log, whatever, and actually snap off, right? Now these are actually movable, right? They bend here, but we had also a nice experience where a rider just put on some new, really expensive parts from a company and on their GS. Didn't want to adjust it higher up. Immediately first ride, hit a rock, snap the whole thing off, right? So it's not only better for shifting while standing, but it's also better to avoid buying it twice. This is when I'm sitting. I still have no problems really shifting here, but when I'm standing, I still have enough room here that I can shift without having to do big movements or even having to just sit down and switch gears and then stand back up again. Once you get your new bike, this is one of the first things I do. Get everything in order according to your likings, according to your specifications, and you're gonna have so much more fun riding. Join us next time with more tips on ADV bikes.